That was going everyone. Salvi from the SpongeBob. That was today. It's September 20th, 2021, and today we're gonna focus on our next potential tropical storm, which will likely develop into Tropical Storm Sam, and determine whether or not this will impact the Caribbean and potentially the United States in the future if the computer models were to trend further westward, which is the current consensus right now. And we'll also briefly discuss about Tropical Storm Peter and Tropical Storm Rose, which are currently centered in the middle of the Atlantic as well. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather accounts. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather accounts. So let's begin by taking a look at the 5-day tropical weather outlook provided by the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. And we do see that there are 3 tropical cyclones, or at least 2 tropical cyclones in the middle of the Atlantic, with one having a disturbance having a likely chance of developing into a tropical cyclone into likely Tropical Storm Sam, and we have another one which currently has a low chance of developing, and even if it does develop, it likely won't impact land. So in this video, we'll primarily focus on our next potential tropical cyclone in the May development region because it could have a better chance of impacting land in the future. So take a look at the current chance this disturbance has of developing. You see that it has an 80% chance of tropical cyclone formation within the next 5 days, which is us. And within the next 48 hours, it still remains low at 30%, but has been steadily rising as we're gonna head as this disturbance is heading closer and closer to more favorable conditions to allow for tropical cyclone development, as it's really starting to get a little bit more organized. Taking a look at the current satellite imagery with this, you see that there's already well-defined rotation embedded within the embedded all throughout this storm. You see that we see those clouds moving southward on the western side, and we see clouds moving northward on the eastward side, which shows that this storm isn't really having a struggle when it comes to rotation. What's really preventing this from being considered a tropical cyclone is the lack of convection around center circulation. Right now, the center circulation, I'd say, is right around this area, and you see for the most part it's fairly dry, and there isn't a lot of convection going on around this low pressure system and this rotation, as it's fairly dry for the most part. And that's an issue for this tropical disturbance because you need that convection to really lower the pressure down enough in surrounding center circulation to enhance the wind speed to be considered a tropical storm. But it should happen in the near future. You see that currently right now it's under a very moist environment. You don't see the darker black colors, which represent drier air, as for the most part it's very moist in this region, so it will allow for a lot of instability within the center circulation. And there is a little bit of wind shear in this storm. You see that you could probably tell by satellite imagery that the outflow clouds are primarily moving towards the west. However, the wind shear isn't very strong enough to completely shear away the storm, and the wind shear is expected to die down as it heads further westward. So while it isn't Tropical Storm Sam right now, it should be able to organize itself, and it should be in an environment that's unstable enough and the wind shear light enough for the center circulation to begin to experience a little bit more convection. And as a result, we'll see the maximum wind speed increase for this low pressure system to be considered Tropical Storm Sam in the future. And taking a look at what lies ahead with this storm, you see that the storm currently, this tropical wave is located right around here, which is around the 28 to 29 degrees Celsius range when it comes to sea surface temperatures. So the sea surface temperatures aren't an issue now, and they won't be an issue in the future, as this storm should stay far south enough from the North Atlantic current to avoid a lot of the cold waters, and pretty much it'll have an open area to develop under very warm sea surface temperatures as it heads further westward. So that won't be an issue regarding its development in the future. Take a look at the computer models to see what they're saying. Let's first determine what strength that the computer models want to bring this to, and then we'll talk about the exact track of where potential Tropical Storm Sam could go. So let's first take a look at the wind shear map at the upper levels of the atmosphere. It's 200 millibar wind speed map, and if we were to move forward with it, you see that the storm or the tropical wave is okay right around this area, and you see there's currently a small amount of wind shear in this area. We do have an upper level high just to the north of it, and it's bringing stronger than usual upper level winds where the air pressure is at 200 millibars. However, this wind shear isn't very strong. You see that we don't see the darker blue contours, which represent stronger wind shear, as for the most part this wind shear is light, especially since the upper level winds are going the same direction as the lower level winds. So there isn't a stark contrast when it comes to wind direction, which I wouldn't say encourages tropical cyclone development, but it makes it a lot easier for tropical cyclone development when the upper level winds and lower level winds are pretty much going the same direction, because then there isn't really a disconnect between where that heat energy will go, as pretty much it's on the same page. The only difference is that in the upper levels of the atmosphere, the wind speed is a little bit faster than it should be, but it isn't enough to prevent this from developing, at least in the future, especially since this wind shear should wind down. For now, it should at least slow it down from developing as early as it could. I'd say before the 48-hour mark, it's mostly unlikely to form, but after a 48-hour mark, you see the wind shear completely dissipates, this upper level high weakens, and it's pretty much an area that's very favorable for tropical cyclone development when it comes to the amount of upper level winds and wind shear there is, because it's almost non-existent at this point. And if we were to continue to move forward beyond the 3-day mark, that wind shear is mostly light for the most part. There is going to be a little bit of an upper level high above this storm, but it actually might help this storm because it might create a good outflow for a lot of the air molecules and the latent heat in the upper levels of the storm to divert elsewhere, and it'll create a nice outflow for this storm to continue rapid convection within center circulation. So this upper level high, despite some of the wind shear might bring north of the storm, it's probably going to help this storm create a good outflow to allow for more convection to occur, rapid convection to occur. And the GFS model forecasts that as it does strengthen it quite a bit down to the 990s. And while it does weaken for a bit, you see that it still remains at least tropical storm status, and I'm going well in the future with this, but the GFS model wants to strengthen this even further into the forecast run. So the wind shear will mostly be light for the most part. In terms of the dry air, that might be the biggest obstacle that the storm will need to encounter as it heads further westward. However, the thing that's really helping this storm right now, and at least for the near future, is that currently Tropical Storm Rose is sort of moistening the atmosphere in this region, or the main development region, just a bit to pretty much keep the dry air away from what will likely become Tropical Storm Sam for at least a little bit. Because if we were to look right now, there's Tropical Storm Rose and there's the tropical wave that will likely develop into Tropical Storm Sam, and you see just behind Rose there's a moist area, and that should help this storm find its instability within the center of circulation, or allow it to have more convection, at least in the near future, and that should pretty much push away that stable air from the center of circulation. Of course, as Rose moves northward, so will the moisture, and the atmosphere might become dry again, and you see that the dry air, the GFS model in the I'd say around 6 days from now, on Sunday, September 26th, it expects this storm to encounter quite a bit of dry air, and hopefully this dry air does swallow this storm and completely kills it. But the GFS model is maintaining the fact that while it will weaken it, the storm will remain intact, mainly due to its small circulation, its forecasting, and beyond that, the GFS model isn't expecting much dry air. So we need to see how much dry air there is to determine how much this will strengthen in the future, and it's going to be difficult to forecast because, again, we're forecasting this 4 to 5 days out. But right now it seems like there likely will be dry air as this heads further westward, closer to the Caribbean, that it will need to encounter. So we're gonna need to wait and see how much moisture there is. If there's a little bit more, then we could see this never weaken as it heads further westward. However, if it's around, if let's say if GFS model is perfectly correct, then it should at least weaken it just a little bit as it heads further westward, which would definitely be the best case scenario. But we just have to wait and see in terms of what the European model is saying regarding the strength of this of what will likely become Tropical Storm Sam. If we were to continue to move forward, you see that the European model is very lenient on strengthening this a lot more than the GFS. The GFS model is primarily projecting this to remain at least around tropical storm status between 5 to 6 days out. However, the European wants to develop this not only into a hurricane, but potentially high end, maybe category 2 or close to a category 3. As you see, about 6 day mark on Sunday, September 26th, it develops this into 974 millibar hurricane. So there is certainly uncertainty regarding the strength forecast, because two of the main computer models are having pretty big disagreements regarding the strength, and it really all depends on how much dry air there will be. However, at this point, based off of how it's looking, I'd say more likely than not, we're more likely to see a hurricane out of this, because the wind shear will be light, and while there might be some dry air, I don't think it's going to be enough to prevent this from developing into a hurricane. So I could at least forecast maybe a hurricane at least within the next 5 days, but a tropical storm is almost inevitable at this point, I'd say, but a hurricane could certainly be possible, as I'd say a hurricane is more likely than not than a tropical storm right around the 5 to 6 day mark. But again, a lot of uncertainty, so we just have to wait and see how much dry air there is. But I will say that likely we will inevitably see a tropical storm out of this. Now, taking a look at the regarding the track forecast, which is probably even a bigger question you guys are asking, because this could develop, let's say, into a category 5, but if it doesn't affect land, that's all people need. So to determine the track of this, you take a look at the European model. You see the primary steering flow will be this Bermuda Ridge, and I'd say there still might be that potential that maybe there could be just enough weakness in the ridging to where this just moves up northward and it doesn't affect anybody, which will definitely be the best case scenario, just like how Tropical Storm Peter and Rose are going to maneuver right now. However, it seems like both the computer models want to take this further westward, which definitely wouldn't be good news, because you see that the European model doesn't expect this weakness in the ridging to be strong enough to completely steer the storm out to sea, and it expects another ridge to move through and steer this further westward. If we were to continue to move forward, you see it takes it pretty far west, and not only that, the European model wants to take this further southward to where it could become a concern for the Caribbean islands in the future. Taking a look at what the GFS model is forecasting, the GFS model is forecasting this to move a little bit slower and expecting it to be a little bit weaker, and it's expecting it to be further northward, which would definitely be good news, because the more north it is, the more likely it is to get steered out to sea. But we can't always go by that, because you see that if we were to go way in the future, do not take this at all seriously. But I just want to point out that if we were to take this way in the future, you see it does come uncomfortably close to the east coast. So just because it's this far up north does not completely take out the chance that this could go all the way to US East Coast. So, but there's certainly a better chance that if it's this far up north, it gets absorbed by a jet stream dip or a trough and just moves out to sea. So we just need to wait and see. Currently, both the computer models want to take this further westward, and the GFS model does eventually strengthen it quite a bit to potentially a major hurricane, as it expects this weakness in the ridging not to be weak enough to really steer this out to sea, as it expects this ridge to take over and steer this further westward. How far west is still has yet to be seen. How far south has yet to be seen. Depends on the position of this ridge, and if this will impact the United States, we're still way beyond forecasting that point. It really all depends if there's a trough here or not, if this were the case. So right now, I'd say there's still that possibility that this could steer out to sea. However, the trending from the computer models is that this will move further westward, but don't rule out the chance this moves out to sea, which would maybe be the best case scenario. We just have to wait and see over the next several days how the computer models react to these changes. But I'll make sure to update you guys as we get more info in the future. In terms of the model intensity guidance, you see that I'd say around half of them take this to hurricane status, and around the other half remain this right around tropical storm. But pretty much all of them are forecasting this to develop into a tropical storm. So I'd say a tropical storm is almost guaranteed at this point. And a hurricane is certainly possible, almost like I'd say a 50-50 shot within at least the next 5 days, and could grow even more if we were to include the days beyond that. So I'd say just forecast a tropical storm for now and potentially a hurricane, and don't be surprised if there's a hurricane in the future based off what the model intensity guidance is saying. In terms of the current track, they're all taking this west-northwestward, and the best case scenario would of course be if this moves straight up northward, but none of the computer models could currently forecast that far out into the future. So we just need to wait and see how the atmosphere maneuvers itself over the next several days to determine if it'll move northward or head further westward to a point where it could become a Caribbean or potentially a United States concern, as I'll make sure to update you guys as we get more updates. In terms of my forecast, based off of the recent trends in computer models, I'm expecting potential tropical storm Sam to just move westward and maybe come close to the Caribbean. So I'd say for the Caribbean islands, just at least be aware of this. I wouldn't say prepare, it's still far too early to do that, but at least be aware of this, because I think there is certainly that possibility that it could move just south and west enough to where it impacts you guys. So just be aware of this in the future. In terms of other things that are currently in the Atlantic at this time, we of course have Tropical Storm Peter and Tropical Storm Rose. However, the good news is that they're not really expected to do much of anything and just meander into the middle of the Atlantic. However, Tropical Storm Peter could impact Bermuda within the next coming days. If we were to take a look at the current forecast from the GFS model, here's Tropical Storm Peter, here's Rose. And if we were to continue to move forward, the GFS model expects the dry air to be too much for Rose to handle. So as a result, the storm should pretty much die out in the middle of the Atlantic, not really affecting anyone. Peter, on the other hand, the GFS model does weaken it quite a bit, but it expects some of the moisture from Peter to impact Bermuda. So in Bermuda, at least be prepared for maybe heavy rain. But even if this does, or whether this does or doesn't make landfall as a tropical storm, it should primarily be a rain threat and nothing more than that. So I wouldn't worry too much for the island of Bermuda. In terms of the forecasted tracks, you see that the National Hurricane Center wants to take a tropical storm very close to Bermuda. So we might see gusty winds, maybe a higher risk of rip currents. So do not underestimate rip currents. If there's a rip current risk, just stay out of the water, since it's a very avoidable way to die. So just make sure to stay out of the waters if there's a rip current risk, and at least be prepared for enhanced rainfall right around the Saturday time frame this weekend. And in terms of Tropical Storm Rose, you see that it isn't really expected to do much of anything or impact much of anyone, so it shouldn't be much of a worry there. But yeah, guys, at least for the Caribbean, at least be aware of the potential Tropical Storm Sam, as it could head further westward. But I'll make sure to update you guys as we get more updates regarding how far west Sam will go and how close to land it will go. But I guess that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.